Good evening, traveler. I am Silas Whitmore, and tonight I bid you rest your weary thoughts and follow me back through the corridors of time to a night both whispered about and seldom understood. We drift now into the late Middle Ages to a place where stone halls echo with music fading to embers and torchlight flickers upon faces flushed from drink and the long revelry of a wedding feast. Somewhere beyond the laughter, a bride steps away. Her gown heavy with dirt and hours rustles against the floor as she moves toward a chamber, not her own, her heart weighted, not with anticipation, but with dread. The world of a medieval bride was not the romantic canvas of modern tales. There were no silk-draped rooms, no tender serenades beneath the glow of moonlight. Instead, there were duties whispered by priests' customs, enforced by family, and a night shaped less by affection than by law, faith, and the pressing gaze of kin. Some brides had never laid eyes on their husbands until that very day. Others knew him only as a name, a contract sealed by land or livestock. And all noble or peasant walked into that first night as both a woman and a vessel for the hopes, judgments, and bargains of their families. So tonight we shall wander gently through that uneasy hour, the fears, the pressures, and the quiet endurance of women whose first steps into marriage were shadowed not by passion, but by expectation. Draw your blanket close, dim the lights, and let the hum of the world outside soften. If you find yourself grateful you were not a bride in the 14th century, leave a kind one below. If you do not, well, kindly press that like button anyway. Now let us begin. The music fades first, as all things must. What lingers is the dull scrape of wooden cups on rough tables, the murmured talk of weary guests, and the wavering laughter of men too deep in their cups to stand without swaying. The feast, once a rushing tide of sound and motion, ebbs into the slow, uneven rhythm of exhaustion. In the dim glow of tallow candles, the bride sits quietly apart, her spine aching beneath the weight of layered wool and linen, her neck stiff from hours of nods and smiles that never truly reached her eyes. The gown she wears heavy with embroidery, and the day's dust drags at her shoulders like a patient anchor. Her fingers pale and slender rest, folded in her lap, motionless but for the faint tremor born of fatigue. Around her, the revelers persist. They drink and sing in hoarse voices, calling for more bread, more ale, another song to delay the creeping end of the night. The groom, somewhere in the thick of it, throws back his head to laugh at some bawdy jest, the sound rising above the hum like a sudden bell. He is flushed, ringed with cousins and friends, his words warm and booming. Since the vows he has spoken little to her, perhaps he will not speak much tonight. It is not his silence that unsettles her, but the uncertainty, the weight of what waits beyond the candles when the hall stands empty and the noise fades into whispers. The air is thick, heavy with the mingled scents of roasted meat, spilled drink, and damp wool warmed by too many bodies. Each breath brings a taste of smoke, of heat, of lingering ash. Outside, the wind claws softly at the wooden shutters, a gentle hollow sound, as if the night itself is calling her name. She knows her moment to rise will come soon, perhaps with the next song, perhaps with the last plate cleared. There is no proclamation, no gentle ushering away. She will stand to gather her skirts and walk softly into the waiting dark, while dulled eyes follow her with quiet interest, curiosity, sharpened by wine. She feels their gaze even now, from corners where shadows bend and stretch. Guests take note of the slope of her shoulders, the pale cast of her face, the tired curve of her mouth. They will watch her go, and they will murmur when she is gone. Some will sigh, some will smirk, and some will whisper her name as though it were a riddle they intend to solve by dawn. The hall feels smaller with every passing breath, every echoing laugh, every scrape of chair against stone. Soon she must rise. Soon the feast will end for her, and another trial will begin. The sound of the feast lingers even as the bride moves away, its echoes clinging to the air like smoke that cannot quite escape a chimney. Her steps are deliberate soft, each one a quiet scrape upon the uneven planks of a narrow corridor. The walls lean inward, rough stone catching the chill, and every draft of night air feels like a whisper against her neck. Ahead lies the place they have prepared, not a sanctuary, not a private retreat, but a room set aside because tradition demands it. Sometimes it is a chamber with a sagging bed, sometimes merely a loft above the stables, or a cleared corner of another family's home, separated by nothing more than a curtain. It is never truly her own, and tonight it will not belong to her alone. For in this moment, privacy is more a tale than a truth. The door, if there is one, hangs on weary hinges and does not lock. The shutters rattle with every gust thin and warped, letting in both the cold and the muffled hum of the revelers below. But it is not only the voices and the wind that intrude. Tradition, heavy and unyielding, brings witnesses, servants, attendants, or members of the household who linger just outside the threshold, or worse, within the room itself, backs turned but ears alert. They stand in silence, posted like shadows, waiting not for spectacle, but for certainty. To ensure the marriage is not merely spoken, but sealed, they must hear, they must know, and later they must tell. Even when no one stands at the foot of the bed, the weight of their nearness seeps through the walls, through the door, left slightly ajar, through the muted sound of shifting feet in the corridor. The bride feels them as surely as if their eyes rested on her skin. She can picture them faces, turned expressions, flat, perhaps whispering to one another in low-practiced tones, ready to confirm the union to eager ears at dawn. The knowledge coils in her chest like a cold, heavy rope. The space itself offers no comfort. Rough boards creak underfoot. A straw-stuffed mattress, uneven and faintly damp, rests atop a low frame. A coarse wool blanket smells of smoke of labor, of the hands that wove it. The walls are close, yet not close enough to keep sound within. Every murmur from below, another cheer, the clatter of a mug, a song begun anew, slips in through the cracks, blurring the boundary between this chamber and the world beyond. This is no haven. It is a stage, a waiting place, where modesty, comfort, and solitude are set aside in favor of duty and proof. She pulls the blanket around her shoulders, though the chill is not only from the air. Outside the door, a floorboard creaks. A cough. A quiet shift of boots. The listeners are waiting, and she knows with each breath that even behind this door, even in the deep shadow of the night, she is not truly alone. The air in the chamber holds still, yet it feels heavy, as though the walls themselves know what is expected to unfold within them. The bride stands near the narrow bed, her hands twisting the edge of the coarse blanket, her thoughts wandering in circles she cannot still. Somewhere beyond the door, the steps of her new husband grow closer, measured deliberate, each one echoing through the quiet, as though the corridor itself carries word of his approach. She knows his name, his family, the land he calls his own. She knows the weight of the ring, now resting on her finger, the words the priest spoke, the vows she was guided to repeat. Yet she does not truly know the man who will soon enter this room. In many households, especially among the noble, this night brings two strangers together more by contract than by choice. The bride may have seen him across a hall once, or perhaps she first met his eyes beneath the veil only hours ago when their union was bound before God and witnesses. There was no gentle courtship, no whispered words beneath trees or glances exchanged by firelight. Only signatures, blessings, and the expectation that she would now belong not only to him, but to his lineage, his lands, his children yet unborn. Her heart, still racing from the day's ceremonies, beats with a cold, unsteady rhythm as she wonders who will step through the door. The handle shifts. The wooden latch creaks. She draws a shallow breath, feeling the cold air bite at her lips. There is no time to compose thoughts, no space for the comfort of retreat. Her world, once filled with the noise of music and voices, narrows, now to this room, this threshold, this man. His shadow arrives first, stretching across the wall in the flickering light, long and unfamiliar. Then the figure follows, filling the space with his presence, carrying with him the sense of wine travel and the feast still murmuring below. His voice, when it comes, is low, perhaps uncertain, perhaps steady. It is hard to tell over the drum of her pulse. She lowers her eyes as taught, but she cannot silence the questions turning within her. Will he speak gently or sharply? Will he reach for her hand, or for the proof others wait to hear? Is he kind? Is he cruel? Or merely indifferent, thinking only of duty, as she must her breath slows shallow and cautious as the room seems to grow smaller still? This, she knows, is the moment all have been waiting for, not for love, not for tenderness, but for certainty. And as the door closes with a soft, hollow thud, the chamber darkens by a breath, preparing to hold what must come. Outside, beyond its thin walls, the faint shuffle of boots and the quiet hum of distant voices remind her others are still listening. And so as the room grows smaller still, her mind begins to drift toward a single thought. How in such a world can any comfort be found at all? The room is quiet, but the silence feels watched, as though unseen eyes linger beyond the thin boards and crooked shutters. The bride knows they are not far. Beyond this space, her family waits as family waits, each expecting the night to end not with tenderness, but with proof. It is not only a union of two people, but a binding of two houses, two fortunes, and every quiet calculation of inheritance and legacy. Whatever unfolds within these walls will not remain here. At dawn, there will be whispers, questions, and perhaps a servant's quiet confirmation that the vows spoken in daylight were carried into the dark. For a bride, this night carries a weight heavier than any veil or gown. It is not simply the fear of the unknown man, but the knowledge that her worth, her family's honor, and even their alliances may rise or fall upon what happens before morning. Among the noble, a missing stain upon a sheet could spark disputes, annulments, or worse scandal that lingers like a stain of its own, whispered through courts and carried in letters. Among the common, though the rituals are humbler, there is still the watchful eye of neighbors, ready to weave a tale from shadows and scraps of rumor. Even the priest, whose voice bound her hours before, would remind her that the union must be fulfilled, that the sanctity of marriage rests not only upon vows, but upon the act that follows. The bride feels this expectation pressing in from all sides, not through shouts or commands, but through the quiet, suffocating truth that she cannot falter. To do so is to risk shame, not only for herself, but for every soul who celebrated her today. Outside the door, she imagines the shifting of boots, the low cough of someone posted nearby. Perhaps they stand as impartial witnesses, or perhaps as quiet messengers for the waiting families. Either way, they serve as a reminder this moment is not hers alone. It belongs to her kin, to her husband's kin, to the church, to a world that will turn her most private hour into a piece of public certainty. Her fingers trace the rough weave of the blanket. Her breath slows, not from calm, but from the cold heaviness in her chest. Somewhere beneath the murmurs outside and the faint strains of song still rising from the hall, she can almost hear the steady tick of expectation counting down the hours until morning, when judgment spoken softly but felt sharply will arrive. And as her thoughts settle upon the burden of so many watching, another truth creeps in soon. Even this silence will be broken by the rules of the church, whispered reminders of what she may and may not do as the night drags on. The night, though, still does not feel free. Even here, in this narrow room, where the only light is the faint flicker of a dying candle, the church's voice lingers like a shadow upon the walls. It came earlier soft, yet firm, woven into the priest's blessing at the feast, and whispered again by older women as they straightened her veil. A marriage, they had said, must be honored not only by vow, but by the act that follows. Yet even that act, they warned, must not be too eager, too warm, or stray beyond its sacred purpose. For in this age, a bride is not only a wife, but a vessel for duty, and each moment in this night is weighed against rules shaped by men of cloth and scripture. The church, ever watchful, has marked its calendar with forbidden days, holy feasts, when no touch is permitted, seasons of fasting, when the marriage bed must remain untouched, and even certain phases of the moon thought unfit for such closeness. Priests, in their stern tones, have cautioned against indulgence, reminding that pleasure for its own sake is temptation, and temptation, if unguarded, can wound the soul. It is not joy they speak of, but penance, not union but restraint. These words echo now in the bride's thoughts as she sits upon the edge of the rough mattress, fingers clasped tight in her lap. Her heart beats heavy not only from the strangeness of the man who now shares this space, but from the burden of invisible judgment. She fears not only failure, but misstep, some gesture, some moment that might be deemed too wanton, too sinful, and whispered about beyond these walls. For the church's reach stretches far, and its judgment can cling longer than any scandal. Her breath comes slow, as though measured to match the weight of the silence around her. Outside, the faint scuff of boots upon the floorboards reminds her there are ears waiting not only to hear that the marriage is made whole, but to ensure that nothing about this night defies the rules laid down by faith. She knows deep within that, even here, even now, she is never beyond the grasp of watchful eyes, seen or unseen. And as the candle shrinks lower, throwing shadows that dance along the rough walls, another worry stirs within her chest, a fear that this night, already heavy with scrutiny, may yet demand more, for in some houses proof itself will be asked for at dawn. The candle burns lower, casting a thin, trembling light that does little to warm the air. Yet even in this dim glow, the bride feels the heat rise in her cheeks, not from the cold, but from the thought of what will be demanded when dawn arrives. For in certain houses, especially among the noble, this night is not left to fade quietly into memory. It must be witnessed not by eyes, but by evidence, tangible, undeniable, carried into the morning light for all to see. The custom is as old as it is cruel. The sheet taken from the marriage bed must bear a marked blood proof of the bride's untouched state, the sign that the union has been sealed not only in word, but in flesh. At first light, it may be carried before family, before attendants, sometimes even before the household staff, a silent banner declaring the bride's worth and the family's honor. A mark upon the cloth means satisfaction, a whisper of pride, a nod from fathers and uncles who weigh lineage and alliances more heavily than the quiet heart of the girl at their center. A clean sheet, however, carries danger. It invites questions, whispers, accusations. Was the bride truly pure? Has the union failed? Is there shame to be divided among them? All the bride knows these thoughts, as surely as she knows her own name. They coil in her chest, twisting tighter with every flicker of the dying flame. She has heard the stories of brides weeping into the dawn of marriages, unraveled before they had begun, of women cast aside or disgraced because a single cloth bore no stain. She feels the press of expectation heavier than the wool upon her shoulders. This night is not about comfort, nor closeness, nor even the man who now shares the room with her. It is about a mark, a sign, a token that will travel beyond these walls and speak for her when she cannot. Outside, the faint sounds of boots and whispers drift through the cracks, as if the house itself waits to know. She draws a slow, measured breath, willing her hands to still, willing her thoughts to quiet, though they do not. In this silence, she wonders not if the morning will come, but how it will receive her whether with nods and approving murmurs, or with the heavy hush of disapproval that lingers longer than any sound. And as the last inch of candle melts, darkening the corners of the room, her thoughts turn from proof to the pain that may follow. For many brides, this night brings not only shame or pride, but the raw ache of a body unready for what is demanded, a burden that lingers far beyond the rising sun. The candle has burned itself to a nub, its glow little more than a trembling halo clinging to the wick. Shadows stretch long and restless across the walls, and the chamber feels as if it is holding its breath. The bride sits still upon the edge of the rough mattress, her hands gripping the coarse wool blanket knuckles, pale against the dim light. There is a heaviness in her chest, but deeper still, there is the quiet dread of the pain to come, an ache she has not yet felt, but which others have whispered of in hushed, uneasy voices. For many brides, especially the young, their bodies are unprepared for what is demanded on this first night. There are no gentle lessons, no quiet teachings to soften the unknown. The only counsel comes as warnings muttered by older women behind closed doors, words clipped and vague, as if speaking them too plainly might bring shame upon the speaker. The rest she must learn here now, in the cold hours when the last notes of celebration have faded and only expectation remains. Her heart pounds slowly, heavy and deliberate, as she wonders how much of what she has heard is truth and how much is rumor spun to frighten. She feels the mattress beneath her, a lumpy, uneven thing stuffed with straw, its surface already scratching against her skin. There is no softness here to cushion the body, no warmth save for the blanket and the faint heat of the candle's dying light. Every detail presses against her awareness, the rough weave of the sheets, the draft slipping through the shutters, the weight of her gown as it tangles about her legs. These are the things she can feel, and yet beneath them all waits the unknown, the sharp edge of a moment she cannot avoid, and the soreness that might linger well beyond this single night. She has heard of brides who could not walk easily the next morning, who kept their faces lowered, not from modesty, but from the struggle to mask their discomfort. Some whispered of bleeding that would not stop, of midwives summoned quietly before the household stirred, of women left with pain they could not name aloud. These thoughts swirl and settle like heavy fog, filling the room as surely as the cold air. Her breath catches shallow and uneven. The door remains shut, the world outside muted, but she knows her time is slipping closer with every flicker of the fading light. And through her fear, another thought begins to surface, not of her own ache, but of the man who will soon cross this threshold, and what expectations, unspoken yet heavy, might drive him as he enters. The shadows have crept closer, swallowing the corners of the room, and only a thin breath of light lingers where the candle still burns, its flame shrinking, flickering, bowing to the night. The bride remains still, her hands folded over the blanket, listening to the quiet beyond the door. Somewhere in that stillness, there is movement, the faint scrape of boots, the pause of breath, the sense of someone waiting just beyond. She knows it is him, the man whose name now binds itself to hers, the figure she has been given, not chosen, whose presence carries not just flesh and voice, but the full weight of duty, of lineage, of expectation. She does not know what thoughts he carries as he stands outside, but she can imagine. For men in his place, this night is not burdened with fear in the same way. There is pride, there is perhaps anticipation, but above all, there is the unspoken charge to prove himself as much as to possess. He is not free from weight, but his burden is different, to see the union made whole, to ensure the whispers at dawn speak not of failure or weakness, but of a man who did his part. In some houses, even his reputation might hinge on what is carried from this room when morning breaks. The bride imagines his hand upon the latch, hesitating for a breath before pressing down. She wonders if he is gentle or cold, thoughtful or indifferent. Perhaps he will speak softly, offer comfort to still the tremor in her chest. Perhaps he will say nothing at all, letting the silence stretch, filling it only with the motions that tradition demands. She cannot know until he steps through, and the uncertainty lies heavier on her shoulders than even the weight of her gown. She has seen him earlier across the tables, heavy with food, his laughter ringing among his kin, his voice full and certain. Now she wonders what remains when the crowd has faded, when there are no cousins to cheer his jests, no toasts to raise. Is he still the man whose voice carried, or does he grow quiet as the rest of the house sleeps, leaving only the distant hum of the revelers below and the cold breath of the wind at the shutters? The floor creaks faintly. The latch turns slow and certain. The sound feels louder than it is echoing in the chamber, as though the stones themselves are listening. The bride lowers her gaze, steadying her breath, preparing for whatever shape his entrance will take. For this night is not theirs to share in freedom, but theirs to endure, as time itself seems to stretch, waiting for the hour when bodies are stilled, and the house at last drifts into the deep pause before its second sleep. The night stretches long, its silence deepening as the last echoes of the feast below fade into the distance. Somewhere beyond the shutters, the wind sighs through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and fading smoke. Inside the narrow room, the air is heavy and still, as though even time itself has grown weary. For in these hours, the rhythm of rest is unlike that of our modern world. Sleep does not come as one unbroken span, but in two parts separated by a quiet, lingering wakefulness that holds the household in a muted pause. It is within this pause between what they called the first sleep and the second that many such nights unfold. The body, having surrendered to its early drowse, wakes again near the middle of the night, not with alarm, but as if stirred by some ancient rhythm. The house remains dark, yet it is not entirely asleep. A servant may stoke a dying fire. A guard may pace the courtyard stones. And in rooms like this one, the stillness becomes the stage for duties, both expected and unspoken. The couple, bound by vows, spoken hours before now, find themselves alone, or as alone as a house full of ears allows in the hollow between sleeps, when the night feels both endless and fleeting. For the bride, this hour feels heavy, stretched longer by the weight of all that surrounds her. The revelers below have grown quiet, the guests dispersed to pallets and straw, but she knows the stillness is not complete. Somewhere outside the door, there are listeners who will not drift into dreams until they are certain of what has transpired within. Beyond them, the household stirs in subtle ways, the faintest creak of boards and whisper of movement traveling through the silence like ripples on a dark pond. The candle gutters its flame, shrinking to a small flickering point. Shadows grow deep and soft, blurring the rough edges of the walls, and the room feels suspended, as if held apart from the passage of hours. It is here in this strange middle of the night that the weight of duty must be carried when sleep is broken, but expectation is not, and the world outside holds its breath along with her. And as the shadows deepen and the quiet settles, heavier another thought brushes her mind. For those of humbler birth, far from such customs, this hour may look different, simpler, yet marked by hardships of its own, where privacy is scarce and comfort scarcer still. The night does not always unfold as the watchers beyond the door expect. For all the vows and customs, the quiet weight of expectation can splinter under the strain of mortal weakness, turning the hours meant for solemn fulfillment into something far less orderly. Sometimes the trouble begins with the groom whose laughter was loudest at the feast, whose goblet was never empty. His steps, when he finally climbs the stair, are slow and uneven. His breath carries the bitter tang of ale, and his words, if any, come slurred and stumbling. In such moments, the chamber becomes not a place of union, but a place of uneasy waiting, where the bride sits in stillness while he sways, mutters, and perhaps collapses onto the mattress before duty can even be met. Other times, it is exhaustion that undoes the night. The day has been long filled with ceremony, with layers of fabric and the heat of the crowded hall, with endless nods and polite smiles, and for both bride and groom fatigue hangs heavy on every limb. The mattress, rough as it is, feels less like a stage and more like a trap, pulling them both down into a dreamless doze before the door outside can fall silent. The watchers may hear nothing save the shallow rhythm of sleep, and in the morning, the whispers will carry anyway, spinning tales from what was not heard. And there are moments when the intrusion is more tangible. A servant might knock, murmuring a reminder of the family's wishes, or a household elder might step near to the threshold, clearing a throat in quiet prompting. Even a misplaced sound from the hall below, the sharp ring of a mug, the rise of another drunken cheer, can tear the fragile fabric of the room's uneasy stillness. In these times, the chamber feels less like a sanctuary and more like a fragile, dimly lit stage where every falter, every pause risks becoming another thread for gossip before the next sun. For the bride, these disruptions carry their own weight. Whether through her husband's drunken slumber, the pull of exhaustion, or the sharp reminder of ears and feet beyond the door, each moment becomes another layer of tension. There is no grace in failure, no allowance for rest, only the knowledge that others will speak, and the story, true or not, will travel farther than she ever will. And as the hours press on, and the candle at last burns itself to nothing, she lies still, listening to the faint stirrings of the house. In the hush between breaths, her thoughts drift toward those whose wedding nights, though free of noble scrutiny, carry burdens of their own, the peasant brides for whom there is no proof to display, but no comfort to be found either. The night wears on, and the house, whether great or humble, moves deeper into its uneasy quiet. Yet for brides of different worlds, the weight of this night presses in different forms. For those born to fields and cottages, far from halls of stone and tapestries, there are no sheets to be displayed, no watchful kin whispering outside the door, no fathers waiting for proof. But there is little comfort either. Their wedding nights unfold in spaces as rough as their daily lives, on beds of straw, in rooms where the thin walls let in every draught, or in corners shared with the sounds of animals settling for the night. The only witnesses may be the creak of rafters or the shuffle of siblings in the same cramped dwelling, and though no bloodied cloth is carried at dawn, the murmurs of neighbors can still rise like smoke through the village by morning. For noble brides, the trappings of wealth do little to soften the burden. The bed may be larger the sheets, finer the chamber dressed with carved wood and heavy drapery, yet every touch of luxury carries its own shadow. The walls have ears servants who stand watch in the hall, kin who wait to hear that duty is done, and customs that demand proof as surely as they demand silence. A single sheet clean when it should not be can unravel months of planning tarnish alliances and cast a cloud over a family name that no title or estate can easily mend. Here the bed feels less a place of rest than a stage where the bride and groom must play out a scene, written not by love, but by obligation and scrutiny. For both, there is little true peace. The peasant bride endures the roughness of a world too poor for privacy, while the noble bride suffers the weight of a world too rich in watching eyes. And beneath these different burdens lies the same truth: neither has much say in how the night unfolds. Both lie awake, listening to the sounds beyond their walls, whether it is the whistle of wind through the cracks of a cottage, or the muffled shuffle of boots in a castle corridor, each reminder that even in the deepest part of the night, their lives are not wholly their own. And as the dark thins toward dawn, the thoughts of every bride, noble and humble alike, begin to turn toward the morning. For with the first light will come whispers, glances, and the soft but searching eyes of those who will measure not only the night, but the woman herself. The first light comes softly, a pale gray breath, seeping through the crooked shutters, casting faint shapes upon the rough boards of the floor. The air is cool, still damp with the scent of smoke, and the faint tang of last night's feast drifting up from the lower hall. The house is stirring now, not loudly, not yet, but with the slow rhythm of a waking body, each creak of wood and muffled step a pulse in the morning's quiet heart. For the bride, the stillness is heavier than any sound, for it is in this gentle hush that the watching begins anew. She rises slowly, feeling the stiffness in her limbs, the roughness of the sheets still clinging to her skin. Her gown, cast aside in the small hours, is gathered once more about her shoulders, its weight no lighter for the night gone by. Outside the door, she hears voices soft murmuring, careful not to disturb but keen all the same. A servant moves past the sound of feet sliding against wood, a cough discreetly stifled. Somewhere beyond a cousin or elder might be waiting, listening not to the room, but for the story that will soon take shape. For the morning after carries its own ritual, though unspoken. The household will glance but not stare. They will whisper, but not openly. Their questions are asked without words, their judgments passed in the tilt of a head, the faint rise of a brow, the way a servant lingers too long when bringing water. For noble brides, the sheet marked or unmarked may already be folded, set aside for the eyes that must see it. For peasant brides, the measure is looser, but the stares and murmurs of neighbors carry a sting just as deep. The bride feels each glance as she steps from the room, her body still weary, her thoughts a quiet fog. There is no celebration now, only the low hum of a day begun and the subtle weight of others' curiosity pressing against her every move. The world, it seems, is eager to turn her most private night into a tale to be shared over bread, over ale, over hushed conversations in corners. She draws a long, steady breath, steadying herself as she walks the corridor, each footfall a whisper on the boards. Beyond the windows, the sky lightens the pale sun, rising indifferent to the house, to its whispers, to the heaviness that still clings to her shoulders. And as she steps into the new day, the thoughts she has kept buried begin to surface of longing for something gentler, something freer, even as she knows such things are dreams, not promises in this world. And with that quiet ache still turning in her chest, her story begins to soften, fading from the weight of the night into something broader, more timeless, where the women of the past, though bound by duty, still leave behind whispers of resilience for those who listen today. And now, as the morning light grows steady, we step away from the dim corridors, the whispering halls, and the narrow rooms that held so many restless brides. We leave behind the cold drafts, the silent watchers, the heavy customs of families and faith, and let the echoes of their nights settle softly into the past, where they belong. What lingers as we return to our own time is not the weight of their fear alone, but a quieter thread, the strength it took simply to endure, to rise when dawn came, to face the murmurs and the eyes, and to continue on as life demanded. It is easy, from the warmth of our modern comforts, to feel only pity for those women bound by vows they did not write, watched in moments that should have been their own. But perhaps if we listen carefully, there is something more they leave for us than sorrow. Within their quiet resilience lies a lesson in patience and survival, in the quiet courage of those who lived not for themselves, but for the families, the worlds, and the futures built upon their unchosen steps. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, let these distant voices become a gentle hum, a soft reminder of how far we have come and how much was endured to carry us here. Feel the weight of their world dissolve into the quiet of your own room, where no shutters rattle, no boots linger beyond the door, no eyes wait to judge the night. Rest now, traveler. The night is yours alone, free from whispers and rituals, as soft and still as you wish it to be. And if you have found some comfort, or perhaps some gratitude in these tales of long-ago brides, do leave a one below. If not, well, kindly press that like button anyway, for old Silas's sake. Until next time, sleep deep, and may your dreams be gentler than theirs ever were.